I'm a member of a kind of consortium. We represent certain global interests. We predict the future. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
This is Red Ice Creations Radio. I am your host, Henrik Palmgren, and we are coming to you from Sweden in Scandinavia. A warm welcome wherever you might be, new or regular listeners. It's good to have you with us. RedIceCreations.com is our main website where you can find our radio archives, regularly updated news, links and resources. And we are gearing up to do our first live programs also, so much more on that is coming. We also have a members section where you can access our growing archive of extended interviews with many of our guests going back to over a year. All information on how you can sign up is available on RedIceCreations.com. Today we have with us on the line Nick Begich, all the way from Alaska. He is the co-author of Angels Don't Play This Harp, and he is also behind the excellent Earth Rising DVD series. We're going to focus on a few key areas here today. We're going to begin to talk about Nick's research on harp and weather manipulation. And then in our second segment, our subscriber interview, we're going to focus more on the mind control and the application of good technology versus the implementation of more sinister technology. So this is going to be a very interesting program. Been looking forward to this very long. I also want to mention here Nick's website, earthpulse.com, where you can find a lot more research material and products related to what we're going to discuss here today. Also take a look at layinstitute.org, where you can find a lot of articles and resources. So with that, let's say welcome to Nick Begich. Welcome to Red Ice Creations Radio. Thank you for coming on the program.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's been a little bit of time since I've been on radio in Europe, so glad to be with you today.
We're glad to have you. I'd like to begin to talk a little bit about your background, I guess, in regards to your studies of harp and similar technology, and also how that connects, I guess, with weather manipulation. Now, you are, of course, in Alaska, where harp is located. So I guess that you've been interested in these kind of areas, and especially in harp, since you first heard that they were building this station back in '93, I guess it was. Or do we need to go back further than that?
Well, '93 was when it caught my attention, and we began looking at this facility being built here, which was a series of radio towers, radio transmitters put into an array that would be used for a number of experiments here in our part of the world, but affecting literally all aspects of potential aspects of the planet. When you're talking about these kinds of transmitters are new, they're experimental. The inventor, Dr. Ben Eastland, and I became reasonably good friends over the years. We had a lot of opportunity to talk to each other. He just passed away in December, but what he was doing in the last part of his life regarding weather modification, since his first invention of harp, was pretty profound. But the idea that a mechanism on the ground could be used to manipulate entire environmental systems, I mean, that is really an unbelievable step, and a step that has happened in terms of science.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ben Eastland. When you talked to him and so forth, did he relay to you the purpose directly there and then what the harp facility was for?
Well, harp, it's pretty well spelled out in the patents, and we cite those within the book and the materials that we've published online. And what he did is he developed this concept of utilizing radio frequency energy and then being able to manipulate it in various ways from a station on the ground, so that you could affect the magnetic field lines that surround the Earth, for instance, or you could affect the ionosphere itself, which is a layer that begins about 30 miles above the Earth's surface, and extending several hundred kilometers out from there. And this is a highly energized layer, a very important layer that protects us from incoming cosmic radiation, various particle streams. That if it wasn't there, life would be virtually impossible on this planet. Much more important even than the lower levels that are screening out, say, ultraviolet rays.
Right.
But one of the things that Dr. Eastland saw as being a possibility with HAARP was that you could stimulate reactions in the upper atmosphere. For instance, in the ozone layer, you could stimulate chemical reactions that would literally create ozone and deplete or decrease and change pollutants in terms of like CO2 gases and so on. And, on the positive side, those were some of the concepts that Ben Eastland, Dr. Eastland actually had. In addition, there were a number of defense applications, and those are, of course, the ones that got the attention of the Air Force and Navy when they first began this project back in the early 90s.
Right. Because I guess that the ones who own the facility today is DARPA. Do you know if that's correct?
That is correct. It went from Air Force and Navy over to DARPA back in 2003. It actually transferred. And then the patents, of course, have changed hands a number of times since Dr. Eastland first invented this system for ARCO, with Atlantic Richfield's subsidiary, ARCO Power Technologies. It went from there to a company called E-Systems, eventually to Raytheon, and then British Aerospace now controls the patents that were originally APTI, and this is the subsidiary Atlantic Richfield had set up. But when that was first being done, it was actually Ben Eastland that recruited the first personnel and literally ran that subsidiary and developed these concepts. And one of them, for instance, was for something called earth-penetrating tomography, which is sort of the idea of X-raying the Earth. By analogy, it would be like looking into the Earth several kilometers deep. Mm-hmm. And this was done by pulsing a signal into the upper atmosphere, into the ionosphere, that would return and penetrate the Earth and see and return a signal that you could actually analyze underground structures, which was a remarkable concept.
And when you mentioned that deep penetrating radar, I guess that one way they can use this also is to communicate via these low magnetic frequencies with submarines. Isn't that right?
Right, that is absolutely right, because it takes those long wavelengths to penetrate the Earth and sea so that you can facilitate communication. Now, normally the way that's done is with these very long antennas that are buried in various places around the planet that create these ELF, extremely low frequency signals. The thing is the same signals that are used for those communication purposes and for earth-penetrating tomography also have a relationship to human physiology in terms of predominant brain activity, for instance, in all of the waking and sleeping states occurs in the ELF range. And there's a lot, in fact, in that next segment, we'll get into a little bit more of that on how these signals can actually alter brain activity in human beings, and something that's very important when we start to look at these new technologies.
Very important indeed, yes. We'll dive into that a bit later on. You mentioned the creation, or in some way, I don't understand how that actually works, but that HAARP could then produce more ozone, meaning that what you just said was that it actually can help to clean the atmosphere from some of the pollutants. Is that right?
That is correct, and that's actually reflected in the original patents by Eastland. Unfortunately, no one looked at those experiments, at least not as far as I know, and began to sort of take a look at that whole concept. Although, whether he's here or not on the planet today, his work is, still available, and I'm sure scientists can follow up on the concepts that he wasn't able to complete. But when you look at, some of the other ideas, I mean, when you think about weather modification, which is a lot of what Ben was working on in the latter years of his life, he came up with new concepts where he felt that you could manipulate weather patterns with 1,600 times less energy than what he originally thought when he invented HAARP. And he had done work after HAARP for the European Space Agency in terms of using HAARP systems, for instance, for knocking out the energy in tornadoes, something that he had believed could be done. And later, FEMA and NASA hired him to look at the same type of idea, but in this case using space-based lasers for mitigating tornadoes in terms of their energy. Because what happens with a tornado, basically, is it's a cold front strikes up against a warm front, weather fronts, as they collide, and they create this sort of corkscrewing motion of energy. So Eastman's idea was that if you could heat up the cold front, for instance, with microwave energy generated from something like HAARP, you would decrease that differential, and the tornado would never form. You'd never have that clashing of fronts, or where you did have it, you could kind of intervene. And it's an interesting idea, and it was funded by a lot of folks. There were other ways that HAARP could be used as well for weather modification beyond that.
So, but what that means, I guess, also is that you could reverse that process, meaning that you could put more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely, you could add energy into the already warmed area and create a greater differential between the two, and perhaps trigger even a larger tornado. Yeah, absolutely. And as a weapon, I mean, if you think about it in those terms, I mean, boy, talk about plausible deniability.
Right.
That was artificially induced. The other area that's interesting is in weather modification is you can literally punch a hole in the ionosphere, this layer that begins up. So what you would get is sort of you'd push the ionosphere out maybe a couple hundred kilometers, but that space that you create, about maybe 30 to 40 kilometers in diameter and a couple hundred kilometers high, lower atmosphere then would rush into that space. So what happens then in the case of, say, a low-orbiting satellite goes through that atmosphere, well, it burns up because of the friction created between those molecules that shouldn't be there. The other thing that happens is you also have jet streams within that region, and if you do this, you can alter the course of those jet streams, having very significant downstream effects when it's done in Arctic regions. And this is something that, again, is very sort of simplistic, but at the same time can change pressure systems, can change jet stream flows,
right.
Again, directing weather patterns into places they shouldn't be.
So, again, there's a lot of different kind of applications for this technology or for this facility here. Do you kind of know what the official stance is today in regards to what HAARP is being used for?
Sure. I mean, officially, it's a developmental prototype, which we don't have any disagreement with that. It's a prototype being one to develop these ideas. The basic ones that the military has talked about, earth-penetrating tomography, they openly spoke about. In fact, BBC did a special on this on a program called Horizons some years ago, where they actually acknowledged the effectiveness of that test. The over-the-horizon radar applications, which by using these devices, there are some ways you can manipulate the energy in such a way as to get a view over the horizon of incoming objects, all the way from cruise missiles to intercontinental ballistic missiles re-entering the atmosphere. So, I mean, those kinds of applications all of us can appreciate and understand, and those have been tested, and certain results have been found. The other is transferring energy. They tested this in Canada back before the HAARP was fully built here, and what they did is they actually projected energy into a low-orbiting platform that they were able to keep aloft by sending energy from the ground, because you can concentrate or focus energy in a way that was never possible before. What this can create is essentially a whole arsenal of low-orbiting space-based platforms that can be continually re-energized, so they don't need payloads of fuel brought up to them periodically. Can be literally kept aloft for tens of thousands of hours, and that is a huge advantage from a military perspective.
Very interesting indeed. I mean, when you speak like that, it reminds me a little bit more about the Star Wars program, of course, putting weaponry in space for defense and so forth. Do you think that this research can in some way connect with the Star Wars program?
I believe it always has, and in fact, when you think about energy sources available, one of the other ones that is available and is kind of a huge source of power is the ionosphere itself. If you remember the shuttle experiment, where some years ago they drug a tether along dangling cable from the shuttle. Well, that cable picked up a huge charge that almost blew the shuttle out of the sky, because the energy potentials when you move a conductor